Dozens of professional baseball leagues exist around the world. Some have been around a long time. Others are just getting their feet off the ground. Another one will be starting up soon. A few more are being proposed. It's the sign of a healthy, growing sport, when new leagues are popping up everywhere with people willing to pay money to see them. But like any business, baseball leagues sometimes fail. Sometimes they have a good run and then fade away. Most of the time, though, the signs of failure are obvious from the very beginning. Some owners pull the plug after one season. Others don't give up and spend years losing money before finally throwing in the towel. And there's another category of leagues that were doing just fine, but circumstances beyond their control forced them to fold. I'm going to talk about some leagues today that no longer exist. It's not a complete list. If you do some digging, you can find a lot more. And this is not a ranking. I'll go in chronological order by the year in which they started. We'll look at how they were organized, how they were received, and most importantly, why they failed. Most of these leagues were professional, so the reason for failure can be summed up in one word: money. But why didn't they make any money? Why didn't enough people support the league? That's what we want answered. If you know of any leagues that were started up and then just didn't last, leave a comment and tell us all about it. Doesn't have to be a baseball league, any sports league. But anyway, I said we're going in chronological order, and the first one takes us all the way back to 1878. The Cuban League was the longest running and most successful of any league we'll discuss here. From 1878 till 1961, it was the highest level of competition on an island where baseball has long been the #1 sport. A small number of teams participated, usually between 3 and 5, played during the winter season. It started as an amateur league but became professional in the 1880s and 1890s, about the same time that happened in the U.S. It was a whites-only league in the 1800s, but in 1900, following the Cuban War of Independence, it became integrated. And in the first half of the 20th century, many Negro League stars spent their winters in the Cuban League. Cubans Martin Diego, Cristobal Torriente, and Jose Mendez. American Negro League players like Satchel Paige and Cool Papa Bell. Also, Dolph Luque, the first Latino to pitch in MLB, was a regular in the Cuban League. In 1910, a Cuban team beat the World Series champion Philadelphia Athletics in a postseason exhibition. In 1947, the Cuban League entered into an agreement to have top minor league prospects and young major league players play there in the winter. Cuba won 7 of the first 12 Caribbean series starting in 1949, and the Cuban League was the biggest sports attraction on the island. But that all ended just after the 1961 season, when the Cuban government abolished professional baseball on the island. It was replaced by the amateur Cuban National Series, which was in no way connected to the former. So this is one of those leagues that was doing just fine, but for reasons beyond the owner's control, it had to end. Baseball lived on in Cuba, but Cuban professional baseball has been extinct for the last 6 decades. And now for the story of an instant failure. In 1883, the Union Association was founded and played its only season the following year. This would have been 6 years after the founding of the National League and 18 years before the American League. 12 teams took part in that lone season. Those teams who remained for the whole season played a schedule of just over 100 games, but only 5 teams made it to the end. 4 teams folded during the season. The failure of this league is easy to explain. It was founded by St. Louis millionaire Henry Lucas, who became the league president. He was also the owner of one of the teams, the St. Louis Maroons, and Lucas used his money to get all the best available players for his team. This resulted in the Maroons dominating the standings. At 94-19, they finished 21 games ahead of the second-place team. Nobody wanted to watch a league dominated by one team, and when teams folded, the league had to replace them with teams from lower leagues. It was a circus. In January of 1885, the Union Association held a meeting for all teams, but only 2 teams showed up. It was then decided to disband the league. The only team that survived was the St. Louis Maroons. They joined the National League for the 1885 season, moved to Indianapolis a couple years later, renamed the Indianapolis Hoosiers, and in 1889, the last survivor of the Union Association folded as well. 10 years after the National League and American League came together to form Major League Baseball, the last serious threat to MLB's dominance in North America came when the Federal League was established. It started as an independent minor league in 1913, consisting of 6 teams. Since this league did not abide by the national agreement on player payment and place and organized baseball, it was called an outlaw league. And being an outlaw league, it was able to lure away players from established major and minor league clubs. A year later, the Federal League declared itself a major league and expanded to 8 teams, located in the Midwest and Northeast. Several major league players defected to the Federal League, including 6 future Hall of Famers. Pitcher Walter Johnson would have been the biggest one. He signed a 3-year contract with the Chicago Whales of the Federal League, but backed out after receiving a better counteroffer from his major league club. It was for that Chicago team, the Whales, that historic Wrigley Field was built. The league was very competitive. In 1914, the Indianapolis Hoosiers beat Chicago by a game and a half for the pennant. In 1915, Chicago won the pennant after finishing in a virtual tie with St. Louis, with the Pittsburgh Stogies just a half game behind. Everything was looking all right on the field, but behind the scenes they were in trouble. In the off-season following the 1914 season, Federal League owners brought an antitrust lawsuit against the American and National Leagues. The case was allowed to languish, and without it going forward, the league found itself in financial problems. After the 1915 season, half the teams were bought out by owners from National and American League teams. Owners of the St. Louis Terriers and Chicago Whales bought the St. Louis Browns and Chicago Cubs respectively, and merged their Federal League team into their MLB team. The Kansas City Packers went bankrupt, and that was the end. While the Federal League may have been MLB's last serious threat, the league that most see as being on par with MLB in the first half of the 20th century were the Negro Leagues. This was not one league, but a series of leagues which began as early as 1887. The best-known Negro Leagues, the ones rivaling MLB in talent, started in 1920. It was started, as you may know, because the major leagues in the late 19th century started excluding black players. In 1920, the first Negro National League was formed, and over the next 3 decades, 7 major leagues existed. It's these 7 leagues that are now recognized by MLB as major leagues. The Negro National League thrived in the 1920s with their championship, the Colored World Series, being held from 1924 to 27, won by the Kansas City Monarchs, Hilldale Club, and twice by the Chicago American Giants. Other years, the pennant winner was awarded the title. Those were won by the Giants 3 times, the Monarchs twice, and the St. Louis Stars 3 times. But in 1931, with the Great Depression well underway, the league folded due to financial difficulties. There was also the American Negro League, the East-West League, a second Negro National League, and others. In 1942, the World Series was revived, this time called the Negro World Series, played between the winners of the Negro National League on the East Coast and the Negro American League in the Midwest. From 1942 to 48, the National League team won it 4 times, the American League team 3. Then came integration, first Jackie Robinson, then a few other players, then a ton of players. With all the talent fleeing from the Negro Leagues to MLB in such a hurry, it was only a matter of time. The last major Negro League was the Negro American League. It played its final game in 1958. These were not leagues established to compete with and overtake MLB. Rather, they were put there because of the color line. Once MLB opened its doors, the Negro Leagues lost their purpose, and they faded away. In 1943, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League was founded during World War II, when it seemed like MLB might have to shut down, as many players left to go fight in the war. A women's league was started up in case that happened, so that baseball would still have a presence. There was another women's professional baseball league at this time. The National Girls Baseball League started a year later in 1944, but it was the AAGPBL that was the more successful of the two. The first year started with 4 teams, the Rockford Peaches, South Bend White Sox, Kenosha Comets, and Racine Bells. 11 other teams would pop up throughout its existence. The Peaches won the most league titles with 4. The Chicks, who played in Milwaukee and later in Grand Rapids, won 3. Racine and South Bend each won 2, and the Kalamazoo Lassies won the final league title in 1954. You might guess that the league lost relevance when the war ended and the threat of MLB shutting down went away, but that's not the case. The league's most successful season was 1948. 10 teams competed that year, and the league attracted over 900,000 paid spectators. The league's downfall was mostly due to a change of ownership and a shift from being advertised nationally to more local promotion. It folded in 1954, the same year that the National Girls Baseball League closed its doors. And that was the end of women's professional baseball in the U.S. So what we've seen with all these examples is that in the U.S., several leagues started and failed in the last half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. MLB established itself as the top league, and the experimenting with new leagues mostly stopped. But not completely. The Hawaii Baseball League, which I covered in another video a few months ago, started in the 90s and ended 15 years ago. The North Country Baseball League, in the states of New York and Maine, opened and closed its doors in 2015. So they've learned from the lessons of the past, but there's always a risk that things just won't work out. Okay, and now we switch from the mid-20th century to the start of the 21st, and we move out of the U.S., where we once again see a country's top professional league being challenged by another major league. Taiwan Major League was founded in 1996 to rival Taiwan's highest professional baseball league, the CPBL. The teams in TML were owned and managed by TVBS Media Group, which had previously held the broadcasting rights for CPBL games. After losing those broadcasting rights in 1995, they established the TML to keep the advertising money coming in. 4 teams competed: the Taipei Gida, Taichung Agan, Kaoping Fala, and Qianan Luka. Luka won the inaugural title, Taipei won it twice, Taichung 3 times. TML was able to attract nearly 30 players from the CPBL. This included several foreign players, as the TML allowed more foreign players on their rosters. But their efforts to keep the teams equal may have been the downfall. Players were moved from team to team to balance the team's strengths, and all the players had to sign with the corporation, not with the teams they played for. The league was unable to ever match the CPBL in popularity, and in the off-season in early 2003, the TML was merged into the CPBL. Though the league no longer exists, there have been calls for the CPBL to adopt the name Taiwan Major League, due to the confusion of the name Chinese Professional Baseball League, though it is played in Taiwan. That brings us into the 21st century, and here's where baseball leagues were launched in different countries of the world, as baseball tried to expand beyond its traditional markets of the Americas and East Asia. I'll briefly mention the China Baseball League here, though I would argue it's still in existence. It started in 2002, taking the right approach of a little at a time, small number of teams, short schedule, with hopes of slowly growing from there. But it never really attracted sizable crowds. There were a few canceled seasons in the 2010s, and in 2018 played for the last time. But a year later, the China National Baseball League was launched, with some of the same ball clubs as the previous league. It's really just the same league with a slightly different name, and it's still in operation. The Canadian Baseball League. Baseball has a pretty good following in Canada. It's a wealthy country. People can pay money to see a game. They already had a few independent leagues, but none that spread across the nation. 2 Major League Baseball teams, but this was 2003. The Expos were on their way out. The time seemed right to launch Canada's own nationwide professional baseball league. Started by former Major League scout Tony Riviera and backed by some rich businessmen, they were hoping for a AAA quality league. Former MLB players were on the rosters. All of the managers were former Major League players. They got a national TV deal for the inaugural season. Major League Hall of Famer Fergie Jenkins was the league commissioner, and the first game took place in London, Ontario, in front of more than 5,000 fans. Sounds like it was built for success. But it was all downhill from there. 30 games into the season, only 2 of the 8 teams averaged over 1,000 fans per game. 4 of the teams averaged under 300. They had expected all the teams on average to get more than 2,000 a game. The Montreal team was not allowed to use Olympic Stadium. They couldn't find a suitable field at home, so they ended up playing in a different city. The national TV contract was canceled 6 weeks into the season. The day before the All-Star game, it was announced that the league was shutting down. 5,700 fans showed up to the All-Star game to give the league a proper farewell. The Calgary Outlaws finished with the best record at 24-13, and were therefore named league champions. The Victoria Capitals finished last in the West Division, but had the league's highest average attendance at over 1,600. While the league's attendance figures were disappointing, it might have been a success if given time to make it work. But in addition to the low attendance, there were only 2 sponsors, not to mention the cost of travel going across the country. Half a season was really all they could afford. They probably should have spent more time preparing for that first season, or started on a smaller scale. It was one of those too much, too soon approaches. And here's another one. The Israel Baseball League was launched in 2007. 6 teams competed in a 40-game, 10-week season in the summer. The league was founded by a Boston-based businessman. Players from all over the world were there, greatly outnumbering the local players, though they did try to get as many Jewish imports as they could. The opening game saw a crowd of over 3,000. The usual approach to starting a new league, especially in a country where the sport is hardly known, is to start amateur, then get a few paid imports to help boost the talent level. Then, after a while, when you've got decent-sized crowds of paid spectators, it can go fully professional. But the IBL started out with teams full of paid foreign professionals, and no one in the country interested in watching it, save a small number of expats and tourists. On top of that, the league was not well promoted and poorly managed. There were players missing payments, games canceled early due to inadequate lighting, fields weren't ready to be played on. One manager quit before the season was over. The commissioner resigned after the season. Both of them said they were unhappy with the league. After the Bet Shemesh Blue Sox won the league title in 2007, the league did not return in 2008. And last, we've got Baseball Philippines. It was an amateur league started in 2007, same year as the Israeli League. Unlike the last two leagues we just talked about, this one was approached more modestly. Unpaid local players, number of teams varied. The most they ever had was 9. The most successful teams were the Manila Sharks and Cebu Dolphins. You would think organized baseball would work there. About a century ago, baseball was arguably the most popular sport in the country. In the last 70 years, interest in baseball has gone way down, but there are always people there playing and watching it. They have proper playing fields, a national team full of local players that's competed in 2 WBC qualifiers, so they had a lot more to start with than Israel had that same year. But for one reason or another, organized baseball just doesn't make it in the Philippines. They tried several times throughout the 20th century, every time ending in failure. Baseball Philippines lasted from 2007 to 2012. Another attempt was made in 2019 with the Philippine Baseball League, but it lasted only 1 season. So we can see that bringing baseball into a new market is risky, because you never know how well it's going to be received. It's especially risky if you're starting out with big expectations and pouring lots of money into it. But we've also seen leagues fail in baseball-playing countries, and even those with more modest expectations sometimes don't make it. Sometimes they do make it though, if there's a good product on the field, fans eager to come out and watch, and good business decisions are made regarding the league's operations. They can build something that will last for many years to come. Anyway, that's all for this one. Until next time, this is Baseball International. See ya.